Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. I see so many beautiful faces in the crowd. So we appreciate you taking the time to come out here in person and join in this collaborative conversation about how to get housing for all in our communities. So this evening, we have a great workshop planned for you all. Before we get started, I just want to do some quick housekeeping. So to confirm, we do have interpretation services available tonight. Please raise your hand if you need assistance accessing interpretation services. Si le gustaría usar servicios de interpretación esta noche, por favor, levante su mano y vamos a conectarse con información de servicios de interpretación con Ana Rueda de Vidales. Yeah, I don't think we need those services at the moment. So we also have plenty of snacks and 3 amazing resource booths. We've got Executive Director Stacy Alzibler-Perkins with Gathering for Women in the back. Stacy, if you'd like to wave. Thank you for being here, Stacy. So in addition to Gathering for Women, we also have Executive Director Jessica McKillop with Independent Transportation Network. Hi, Jessica. Thank you for being here and providing some super cute boxed water and some snacks. We appreciate it. And we've also got HiCap Program Manager Alma Mandujano from Alliance on Aging. Thanks for coming, Alma. In addition, we have some coloring activities in the back. If anyone's interested in coloring in the background, you're more than welcome. We've got crayons, fair housing, and affordable housing coloring pages in both English and Spanish. And we have additional resources at the table next to Anna with interpretation for you to check out later on as well. So we have a fabulous group of presenters tonight who will be going over the housing element, how climate and transportation intersect with the housing element, as well as elevating the community engagement best practices as local jurisdictions move forward with their community engagement piece of the housing element. The presentation will be followed by a robust panel discussion, kick-started with a high-level update from each representative on the housing efforts their organization is currently undertaking locally. We'll do intros for each presenter and panelist before each of those respective portions. So we're all here tonight because every 8 years, California requires local governments to update their housing element creating a blueprint for our community's housing needs, as Elizabeth will detail shortly. Basically, this is a once-in-a-decade opportunity to engage with your community's housing development plan, a plan that belongs to the entire community. Its effects will be felt for generations to come, and it's extremely important now more than ever for everyone's voice and priorities to be heard as we collectively take stock of where communities currently are in addressing our local housing needs and where we want to go moving forward. Our region needs your help to ensure local plans incorporate affirmatively furthering fair housing, AFFH requirements, identify suitable housing sites, and result in sustainable communities for residents of all income levels. Meaning, we all need to do our part to ensure these plans effectively produce the supply and type of units in the locations we need in order to facilitate an increase in quality of life for our communities. The workshop is only the beginning of the conversation, and we look to local jurisdictions and the greater community to continue this collaborative work throughout the 6-cycle RENA process in the months to come. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the show over to our 3 presenters who will start by introducing themselves and then move into the presentation from there. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us all this evening for what I'm sure to be there's a lot of knowledge thrown at you at once, so please do not feel overwhelmed. My name is Elizabeth Madrigal. I'm the Housing Policy Associate at Monterey Bay Economic Partnership, and I am just personally elated to be here. I grew up in Monterey County, and it's been great to be able to come back after graduating from college and really just contributing to the community and making sure that we are a county where there's opportunities for all.
Hi everyone, my name is Angela Gonzalez. I am a CSUMB intern with the City of Pacific Grove. I was also born and raised in Monterey.
This is the best intern ever. I'm so proud of her. I'm Anastasia Wyatt, Housing Program Manager for the City of Pacific Grove. And I also want to recognize I have a few PG high school students helping out tonight. You may have seen them up front signing you in. And if you forgot to sign in, please sign in. We really need that sign in, so thank you. And so you'll see them around. Alex, he's here running the IT. Thank you, PG high students. Okay.
My name is Gabriel Sanders. I'm the Deputy Director of Monterey County Land Watch, in charge of our housing policy initiatives. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can all do to make sure the sixth cycle housing element reflects the needs of your community.
Kevin Dayton, I'm the Government Affairs Liaison for the Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. Been in this position since 2016 and experienced many of the housing controversies in the past several years in the Monterey Peninsula.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda Whitmire. I'm currently serving as the board president for the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District Board of Education.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Nurse. I'm the housing manager for the city of Seaside.
Good evening. My name is Guido Persconi. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Marina. And just a special shout out, we do have a council member here, Councilmember Biala, coming away from Marina. Thank you.
Good evening, buenas tardes, Adriana Melgoza, Director of Organizing and Education for Center for Community Advocacy.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tyler Williamson. I am a council member from the city of Monterey.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Meister. I'm the Public Affairs Director for the Monterey Bay Aquarium and here tonight to represent the Monterey County Hospitality Association.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly DeWolf and I'm the Impact Manager for Affordable Housing at United Way Monterey County. Glad to be here.
Apologies, we're making do with 2 microphones tonight.
Perfect. So just getting right to it with this slide. So what is the housing element? This arcane process that is now with us for the next 8 years. So a housing element is the blueprint for how a city will meet its housing targets over the next 8 years. These housing targets are mandated by the State Housing and Community Development Department. They have been since 1968, but it's important to note that this go around, there's new enforcement mechanisms.
Good evening, everyone. My name is
1968, but it's important to note there in the past. So we want to ensure that all cities and the counties within our Tri-County region are in compliance with state law. The housing element is also one of the 8 elements required to be included in a city or county's general plan. And housing elements identify both current and projected housing needs, and they outline the policies, programs, and objectives that are required to meet these needs. And it's very important to note in this slide that community members have input to collectively guide regional growth over this 8-year period. And just one last note on this slide, we as a community need to be sure we're producing housing elements that will set us on track towards more equitable and healthy communities. Great, so for this slide, really just want to highlight why the housing element matters. And you'll see here that housing elements grant communities opportunity to be involved in how growth will take place in your city and or county, to ensure that we are strengthening the 3 Ps that are often used in the housing world, which are those of production, preservation, and protection. And it's also a way in which we can address the climate crisis, which Gabriel will go into depth on in his slides. And then this next slide is a very important component of the housing element as we head into this next cycle. So affirmatively furthering fair housing, what is it? So this is a relatively new law from Assembly Member Miguel Santiago out of the Los Angeles region that was adopted in 2018. Under this legislation, all cities and counties within our state must take affirmative and meaningful action to combat discrimination. So you'll see here just really toning it down, although it's still very lengthy. So the whole intent between this legislation is to combat housing discrimination, eliminate racial bias, undo historic patterns of segregation, and lift barriers that restrict access in order to foster inclusive communities and achieve racial equity, fair housing choice, and opportunity for all Californians, regardless of where they live, whether that be Monterey, Salinas, King City, you name it. And in this slide too, I really just want to point out that housing elements now need to be viewed through this framework of affirmatively furthering fair housing. So the state of California, through the Housing and Community Development Department, will really aim to ensure in their review that this is a part of each city and county's housing element that needs to be present. And in this slide here, I know there's a lot of numbers, but I really just want to highlight this because it's very important in that these are the final 6 cycle unit housing allocations by jurisdiction. So you'll see in this slide that the numbers are broken down per 4 income levels, being very low income, moderate income, and above moderate income. So let's take the city of Carmel by the Sea, for example. So under this distribution, Carmel must plan for and build 113 very low income units, 74 low income units, 44 moderate income units, and then 118 above moderate income units. But the important thing to note here is that as community members, you all have input into how this is collectively going to happen over the next 8 years. Great, and in this slide here, so this is a milestone slide that our team developed in conjunction with some of our partners through the state. Really the intention behind it being just a simplified way to show folks in the community what this housing element / regional housing needs allocation process consists of and what the timeline is. So far, we've already gotten through step 1 and step 2, and we are currently preparing to embark on step 3, but the first portion of it, which is step 3.1, which is that housing element preparation and public participation. So through these workshops, these are really a way in which to get community members involved with this process, but also our hope and intention behind this being that then you'll be able to connect with your city and county planning staff, just be engaged with them, as there are a different variety of ways through which you can track this process and have your voice be heard. And then after this step concludes, will be step 3.2, which is the housing element submission deadline. And for our region, which is the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments that handles all of this, it'll be due December 15th of 2023. So a ways away, but this is a very comprehensive document. So just being sure that all of our cities and Monterey County is meeting that timeline, because there are some consequences that could come about if that timeline isn't met. And then the last 2 steps here, you'll see housing element enforcement. So again, just want to make sure that doesn't occur anywhere in our tri-county region. And then step 5, there will always be ongoing legislative fixes. And as for this last slide from the MBEF end, really just want to highlight the next steps in this process and really what our scope of work will be in the next 2 years as we undergo this housing element update. So you'll see on the first bullet point here are engagement opportunities. So these are the first set of workshops that our team is undertaking. Most definitely not the last. So really looking forward to partnering with cities, counties, and any other folks that might be interested even in smaller scale conversations that are more particular to, say, the city of Marina or Carmel by the Sea, since there are nuances between every city on the peninsula. And the next step is our team is working on a housing element best practices white paper. So our region is in an advantage point in that we're not the first one to undergo this process with a lot of new considerations that have come down from the state. So we're picking up on some best practices from the Bay Area as well as Los Angeles. And of course, tailoring those to our region, since we know that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And then up next is just offering ongoing technical assistance to our cities, counties, and then also updating our white paper on realistic short-term policy changes. Our team had first produced this in 2018, and we're really glad to say that a number of cities and counties throughout our Tri-County region have implemented several of those policy changes. So very excited to just come back with some more updated changes that could make sure that all of our cities meet their building targets over the next 8 years. And last but not least, really just want to highlight that we're tracking and supporting state legislation, which would make housing production more feasible and just really streamline it, since we've all seen that housing production can take much longer than it should. So just very excited to be moving forward in this process, and I'll pass it along to Gabriel Sanders.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, so up there, that's probably a pretty recognizable stretch of highway. Probably one you've seen quite a lot. Maybe you're traveling to work, maybe you're driving to school or going shopping. And maybe it's more cars on the road than that sometimes. So until we're all driving electric vehicles, Teslas or Bolts or whatever is affordable to you, until that's happening, every single one of those cars is more carbon in the air, as you're probably aware by now. And every bit of carbon matters. When we're tackling the housing or the climate crisis, we have to attack it from all angles. So what you have to ask yourself is, how can we reduce the carbon emissions of our cities? And the really convenient kind of overlap with housing policy is that housing policy can allow you to do that. So what does a low carbon city look like? On the next slide, this is an idea. This is one place, and it may not be what Seaside or Monterey or Pacific Grove ends up looking like, but it just means that you've got easier access to public transit. You are closer to your schools, to shopping, to your work. And if there are more houses available inside your city, more homes of any kind, really, that means that the people who have to travel for miles and miles, putting more and more carbon in the air to get here, don't have to travel as many miles, and they will get here sooner. That's quality of life for everybody. And in the end, I think everybody would think it's a bit nicer to have fewer cars on the road and just to have more time to spend with your family or at work, even if you really love your work, like I do. So on the next slide, I'd love to tell you what it looks like when you build in your city housing that will allow you to be closer to work and school and all the other places I've named. It means you have to build up. Our communities are growing. That's what the housing element process has to accommodate. The regional housing needs allocation is based on projected growth of our cities, projected job growth. So it's stuff that we know is coming, and we have to accommodate it somehow. And it just seems like a great opportunity to plan for the future, to plan for more homes in our cities that allow people to be closer. And, not just us now living here, but, the kids that live with you now, and maybe their kids too. This place is beautiful. That's what brought me back. And it would be really great for them to be able to think about staying here, maybe even owning a home someday. So if we keep building within our city limits, we're not only going to preserve natural resources around us, the natural beauty that makes this place what it is, but we'll also make it much more livable for yourself and for generations to come. So that's just something I'd love you to think about. And that's something that Land Watch will be pushing for as much as we can. to show that climate policy really is housing policy, that we can't separate them anymore, and that Land Watch is going to push for as much affordable housing as we can get in our cities, whether it's Seaside, Monterey, Pacific Grove, Delray Oaks, all the way into the Salinas Valley. That's about all I have to say right now, so I'm going to pass it on to whoever's next.
Okay, so I will be talking about specifically what the city of Pacific Grove has been doing in regards to public participation. Okay, so we have already done and will continue to do for community outreach, community meetings and workshops. We attended the Good Old Days, which is held once a year in the city of Pacific Grove. We go to and attend the farmers market once a month. And we do a city manager's report which comes out bi-weekly. And upcoming that we plan on attending is our National Night Out in August and our Butterfly Parade and Bazaar in October. Okay, so we created a housing needs survey in English and Spanish to collect the community's input on what they see and want in the future of housing. An example of a question in the survey is, what do you think are the best ways to address housing affordability? And we asked if it's financial assistance to homeowners to add accessory dwelling units, or do you think it's public funding to construct new housing, or financial assistance programs for people who cannot afford housing, such as subsidized rent and down payment loans, or is it all of them? Another way we engage with the community is through community meetings. This is kind of what our Housing Element 101 meeting looked like. We like our meetings to be very interactive. So at this table, we provided copies of our city's zoning map and asked those in attendance, how do you believe the city will meet the RENA goals? This is a picture of the Good Old Days. We handed out and engaged with the community and talked about fair housing in our upcoming housing element. And we also talked about our housing needs survey. We probably talked to about 65 people, if not more, and we only attended one day. This is a picture of our booth at the farmers market. It's very similar to our Good Old Days. We handed out and talked about fair housing, housing element in our survey as well. So next is our city manager's report. So we have specific questions that we ask for this interview. So some of the questions are, do you work or live in Pacific Grove? And if not, what brings you to the area? What is your living situation like in PG or elsewhere? Like, do you rent or do you own? Tell us a bit about your housing story. How long have you owned or rented? We asked if housing is a cost burden for you, if other inflationary costs are affecting you, and what you want to see for the future of housing in Pacific Grove or elsewhere. So on the left is Sharon Miller. She lives in Pacific Grove, and next to her is Bobby Monroe, and she works in Pacific Grove. And then to the right is Joseph Sanchez, and he is visiting from Pacific Grove. We met him at the Good Old Days. Yeah, he lives in Watsonville. But I'll tell you a little bit about Bobby. She described her living situation growing up as always being crowded. She mentioned she always shared a room with her brother or her aunt that lived with them. She now lives in Seaside with a roommate, but she is looking forward to one day having her own space. And she hopes that the future of housing is more affordable.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Angela. Yeah, so, and also we really enjoy our collaboration on our housing element and our outreach, involving the community, involving the future. Angela's a CSUMB student, grew up in Monterey, wants to stay here the rest of her life. We want to find a way to make sure that happens. We've got a bunch of PG high school students. We want to make sure that we can really plan for the future and hope we can make it more affordable and accessible for everybody. So think of those kids, she's like, I love her. So, and then do you want me to go on with a couple of quick notes? So thank you so much, Angela. Awesome job. CSUMB rules. Let's support our local CSUMB. And oh, I had a quick question here. I see some of my favorite people from PG here, and I want to give a shout out to Jane Haynes. I see you. Hello. Thanks for coming. Don Murphy, our planning commissioner. Hello. Thank you for coming. And I wanted to see how many people are here from PG. Yay, thank you for coming. Yay, PG. Monterey, how many people are here from Monterey? Woo. Awesome. I saw you rode your bike in. Good work. All right. Delray Oaks. Do we have any Delray Oaks? Okay. Carmel. Yay. Representing. All right. And Sand City. Seaside? Yay! I have to say this is one of my favorite places to come. Like, I love the Oldmeyer Center. I've been in so many meetings here and it's awesome. And Marina, shout out to Marina. Woo! Thank you all. We're so excited that everybody showed up tonight. So thank you so much. Great representation from the whole community.
And just real quick to tack on to that, show of hands for anyone who's here from the Salinas Valley or greater community members and neighbors as well. Woo! Thanks for turning out. We're all in this together.
Yeah, awesome. All right, so quickly, City of PG, we're tiny, but we really want to focus on this housing element. Each 8-year cycle to me is just such an exciting period to go through this. Last time I was in Salinas, so it was a lot of fun. We did so many huge community workshops. And I mean, we had 100 people at each workshop at least, and it was fantastic. So we're really excited about the engagement piece. But really what I think we want to focus on in this period is equity and inclusion. That's huge. How do we really put that into our housing element? We also want to focus on people with disabilities, people with different housing needs that we may not have considered in the past. We want to think about people with needs of all income levels. And when you get to the very low income levels, there are people with different needs just within that income category that we need to think about. There are people who are living with dual diagnosis of addiction and they may have other needs. They may need supportive services in their housing. And there may be people who just don't earn a lot, but they work really hard. And they also need maybe vouchers and assistance. So we really want to think about how do we meet everybody's needs for housing in our community. We also are thinking about updating our objective design and development standards. So that's a really critical part so that we're working with developers and developers have a more streamlined review when they come in the door. That's something that's very important to get housing built, right? We have to think about our internal processes and how do we look at our zoning? How do we look at our objective design standards? These are all really critical pieces of our housing element update. We also want to think about transit and safety. PG is a community. We have Del Monte Forest, and that is actually a fire hazard zone, right? So we need to think about that. We need to think about sea level rise too. Probably not so bad where we are, but that's another consideration as we go through a planning process. We want to think about transit. How do people get around? If we're going to build units where people may not have a car, or try to encourage people to not have a car, right? So those are things that we really want to think about in this process, because if we're building units now and using some of the state law, it could be you don't have to have a parking space. Well, great, let's make it work so they don't need a parking space, right? These are things to think about. We want to think about density. we really, PG's pretty built out. We've got some opportunity. We really need to think about how do we use the state density bonus laws in a better way and really use them to our advantage in our community. Those are things that we're going to consider. And there's also one big thing that's come up in our community is the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing. And this is something you may have heard about. Naturally occurring affordable housing is small landlords who rent out their units to their community members. I had a guy who came into my office recently and he said, my landlord's trying to charge me this new fee and it's been taken, my development has been taken over by a big corporate company rather than a small landlord that was part of the community before. So we're gonna lose those naturally occurring affordable units for people. That's scary. I hope in a few months he's not back in my office. They're gonna kick us all out, renovate the place and jack up the rent, right? So these are things that we need to really think about as we're looking at this update. How do we preserve what we have? I have a gentleman who is a homeowner and he couldn't afford to pay his property taxes. And we had to work with that so he didn't get kicked out and end up on the street. So these are things that people are experiencing that we may not think about, but at our level, we see it every day. So those are the major issues that we're gonna focus on in this housing element update. So we'll keep listening to the community, keep doing the outreach. We want to hear what are needs in our community that we can focus on. Thank you.
Testing. Awesome. Thank you all presenters for a nice snapshot of what the housing element is, how climate and transportation intersect with this housing element planning, and then how do we lift up our community and that community engagement process that Angela and Anastasia really elaborated on for us. And on that note of lifting up the community, we're going to pass it over to our robust panel discussion over here. Everyone will have 3 to 5 minutes each to give a high-level update of what they're doing in their industry right now to address housing for the community. And from there, we'll break it out to Q&A discussion with everyone here today. And if there aren't too many questions at first, don't worry, I have some prepared. So we will have a nice discussion, whether we like it or not. Take it away, Kevin.
Thank you, Alyssa. Kevin Dean, Monterey Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. First, I'll quibble with one thing that was said earlier. I would not consider the Monterey Peninsula to be a growing community. In fact, the population in most of the cities is either stagnant or declining. Some cities fairly significantly. And one of the reasons for that, of course, is the lack of housing affordability. And I'll let Amanda talk about the decline in school district enrollment at Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, not to mention all the other ones. This is a region where there are fewer and fewer children, there are fewer people living here, and the housing is very expensive. The Chamber of Commerce, at least since I became Government Affairs Liaison in 2016, our #1 issue for the membership has been housing affordability, because they can't recruit employees to come here, and the employees they do have don't stay here. Retention and recruitment is poor, and it's because the housing is a big problem. And I've seen various efforts to build some affordable housing units in the area, and it's very frustrating, to tell you the truth, when you're actually on the ground having to advocate for this sort of stuff. We got projects approved, and then nothing ever happens with them, and you wonder, were they even properly financed? Could they hit the financing? Why does nothing ever happen? So you got vacant lots and blighted buildings around. Then you have the projects that, of course, there's a lawsuit filed under the California Environmental Quality Act, traffic issues. And of course, the big one I don't want to dwell on too much, lest somebody attack me, it's the water issue. And it is true that developers at least claim that they can't build what they want to because there's not enough water supply in the area. And everybody seems to point out, and I think this is valid, as long as we're very restricted in the amount of water that we have available, the chances of building much housing is pretty grim. The question is, how do you change things? And I'll speak for myself here, not for the Chamber of Commerce. I actually believe that a lot of people in our region do not want more housing. I actually believe it's
Que no
democratic
quieren
will right now.
trabajar.
Even with people who struggle to afford housing, they don't really want more people coming here for a variety of reasons. And I've never seen a poll conducted regionally, what people think about population growth. There was a very interesting one from UC San Diego last year that showed that I think the number is 36% of Californians wanted to see a significant decrease in population of the state over the next 10 years. And only 19% said that they were open to population increase in the next 10 years. And I think you find a similar perspective here. However, I think that's a surface view. And boy, I'd like to see eventually some sort of public relations or more of an effort from our elected officials and MF. You're pretty much, you don't have a lot of allies on this, and the chamber is fortunately with you on this. We got to tell people that if you don't build housing and you have a population where there's fewer children and the demographics are going the way they are, that's not a healthy community. It's not a healthy community when everybody's traveling in from the Salinas Valley or Hollister to go work at jobs here. City of Monterey, 87% of the people who work in Monterey don't live in Monterey. And a large portion of them don't even live on the peninsula because they can't afford it, that's why. So the chamber is going to continue to advocate for various ways like the density housing. I know every time we speak in front of density housing, somebody will say, well, climate change or parking or quality of life or community character. Well, you know what? That sort of thing is compromised when the people who work here can't live here. So we're going to keep on fighting. I think our leadership is totally committed to trying to get more housing here for all income levels, especially for ordinary people who work here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Great start the panel. Okay, start my timer so I don't go time. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Whitmire. I'm here from the Monterey Peninsula Unified School District, and I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about why, as a district, we are interested in issues of housing. And there are three main areas that I wanted to talk about. First, Kevin alluded to this. It's so expensive to live here that our teachers and staff are constantly leaving the district. They just can't afford to stay. So every year we are losing 100 to 150 teachers. That is 20% of our teaching workforce every year that we're having to rehire. So you can imagine the strain this puts on human resources who have to do all the paperwork and the filing and the interviews and getting all of these new teachers out and then in. It takes a strain on students who really thrive on consistency and predictability in who their teachers are and getting to know the faces that they see around campus. And perhaps more subtly, it really takes a toll on our culture of practice in the district. We spend a lot of time, the teachers spend a lot of time doing professional development, learning things, issues around equity, culturally relevant instruction, positive behavioral intervention, and multi-tiered systems of support. It takes years of practice and learning to master these skills and implement them in the classroom. And if we are constantly replacing teachers, it is that much more difficult to implement and really integrate these critical practices that we have as a part of our mission as a district. It also puts a big strain on our veteran teachers who are constantly having to train and mentor new teachers every year over and over. So teacher and staff turnover is a huge issue for us. Second issue that I'm really focused on as a member of the school board is around student homelessness. I wonder how many of you know that 20% of our student population is considered homeless. That's over at our last count, 2,087 students and who in one way or another are considered homeless. That's 22.5% of our student population. That is an unimaginable number of children who are coming to school hungry or tired because they can't sleep because their house is too crowded or because they're in a trailer or in a tent. That makes the learning environment at school a safe place, but it means we need to wrap around services for these students that are, again, as I mentioned, it takes years to build up a culture of practice to support these students who have really high needs. And then last, as Kevin mentioned, is this issue of declining enrollment. So we are funded by the state based on the number of students who attend class every single day. Every year we're losing 150 to 200 students. So every year our budget from the state is going down. And we got some extra funding in the last few years from COVID, which was great. Been able to make up some losses. As we've hemorrhaged students from COVID and the shelter in place, our funding has been held constant, so we haven't faced any repercussions from that yet, but we're coming up to a potential fiscal cliff where eventually our funding is going to come back in line with the number of students that we have. And this could cost the district in the tens of millions of dollars. But over the long term, even without the COVID drop off, this decline in enrollment is forcing us to close schools. So just this past year, the board had to make an incredibly difficult decision to close 3 of our school sites, 2 elementary schools and 1 middle school. And we had lots of community conversations about why that is. And it just comes down to the fact that we are losing kids. We cannot continue to operate as many schools as we do. It doesn't make fiscal sense. So from the school district perspective, teacher and staff turnover is a huge problem. The number of our students who are experiencing homelessness as a result of the cost of housing in our area is a huge problem. And the declining enrollment that we're facing every year is a huge problem. So that's why we are interested in issues around housing. Speaking personally, I would love to see housing built. I mean, if we could get anywhere close to our arena numbers, that would be phenomenal. I would also love to see the school district build housing for teachers and staff so that we can more directly support our communities. So if you're interested in that, I welcome you to come to our school board meetings and get engaged. Thank you so much.
I guess from the city of Seaside perspective, the city council is looking at it as a problem-solving opportunity. There are a lot of issues that we could talk about, but I'll talk about the kind of the solutions they're looking at. Many of you know that, I guess for the last 10 years, we've been working on the Campus Town project. That's moving forward. It's over 1,400 units of housing. We have the Ascent project that will be eventually on Broadway over by the post office. It's about 116 units, I think it is. So there are projects moving forward, but the city is also looking at new projects. And Kevin eloquently talked about the water issue, how that always kind of stagnates projects. The city council is also looking at solutions. So, and if you follow this stuff, know that Pebble Beach years ago took their golf courses off of potable water and used recyclable water. Seaside, PG did the same thing. Now Seaside is working to take our golf courses off potable water and using reclaimed water as well, so that we can recapture those water credits towards housing or development generally in the long run. The city also approved, I think it was 2 council meetings ago, looking at another water project, kind of well injection kind of project. So they're looking at solutions all around. And the city council has also looked at kind of engaging the idea of building on city-owned land. So working with developers, as I mentioned, Campus Town, the Ascent, and so on, but also looking at not just waiting for developers to come along and build for us, looking at what the city can do as its own developer, as a lead developer on city-owned land to build affordable housing. What that means is that developers may come and they'll give us 20% affordable on some of their projects, maybe 30%. But the city can choose to do 60, 80, or 100% on its own property. So we're examining that, and I'm really kind of spearheading that on city-owned land. And working with the city manager and the council, we'll look to see what we can get approved and open for public discussion in the next few months. And actually in this room, back in October, we had the charrette for the Seaside East. Our 600 or so acre property up at the General Jim Moore location. And that is the city's, I guess, greatest opportunity to build or plan for affordable housing, or it's the city's growth. And there's a possibility to do over 5,000 or 6,000 housing units at that site. So if we do it well, a lot of that could be affordable, and a lot of it could be the city can control kind of the destiny of its growth. So the city council is kind of juggling all of these things at the same time, but kind of doing it thoughtfully and reflectively as we move forward to looking at the growth and looking at where and in our housing element, I'm kind of helping to lead that discussion right now. We're looking at where to build in the city, where it makes sense. Where can we do more density, especially in the downtown area, where we can do multifamily, where we can do, and we're doing a lot of accessory dwelling units, for instance, in the city. But we're looking at different housing types and where it makes sense in the city. So like I said, the city council and the staff are kind of looking at it as problem solving opportunities. So thank you.
Good evening. You're probably not going to remember all of this stuff, so I will make mine very short. We have a lot of really awesome panelists, so just a lot of information for the audience. So Marina is actually doing quite a bit for housing. We've updated our website. We've streamlined our ADU process. We have 2 BMR sites within the Dunes development. Cypress Knolls is a large property when you're off Gimjin across from the Target that's going to be developed. We're going to be going to City Council shortly to kick off that process. We are going to be updating our general plan, which is another opportunity. But my main focus is, this is now my 4th housing element. And I don't say that to brag. I say that I've been through this. I've been through hundreds of community meetings. And I would just encourage you, if you're in the audience and you're passionate about housing one way or the other, to stay engaged in the process. I've seen throughout my career that people come to housing element meetings. There's very passionate debates on both sides of the issue. And then there's this drop off, and then a document sits on the shelf. And I don't think that serves anybody's interest. So if you don't get anything out of what I'm saying today, is definitely get involved in the housing element, however you feel about housing, for or against. Share your views with your council member and the staff and local community-based organizations. But after it gets adopted, stay engaged in the process. Go to the city council meetings. Hold the staff accountable. Are we following up on the goals that we said we were going to do? Because honestly, that's the only way, through your voice, through your involvement, that stuff actually is going to get done. So that would be my very short summary to all of you. Just stay engaged, get involved in the process, and let's work together.
Yeah, my name is Adriana, and I'm here with Center for Community Advocacy. I was listening, I was like, okay, gave my presentation, I'm gonna pass it over. Our agency identifies, cultivates, and recognizes leadership within community, farm working community, and low-income community. So many of those 85% come from outside. Many of those are the community that we're engaging and working with, including the farm working community. Our agency works on identifying and making sure that community is centered voice in decisions and processes of entities, including governmental entities, when it comes to making plans for how their community is going to look like. So right now with housing, what we're currently working on is providing workshops for rights and responsibilities of renting. And because we know that, yes, we need housing, but we also need to make sure of what's happening in the current situation with the current housing that we have, and how do we make sure that that's equitable and our community is well off. And so we're also creating what we call comités, committees of residents that are in different communities advocating for their needs, including housing. That's one of the areas that we're focusing on, and we have focused. We've been open for 34 years. I haven't been there for 34 years, but we've been open for 34 years. And we're making sure that community is always the center of any decision-making process, including this one. And when they were talking about how they went out to community in Pacific Grove and engaged community and did all these different things, I was like, wow, let's make sure that they come to all of our areas and talk about what they're doing. Because one of the things that we are doing is we go out to community. We're not asking community to come to us, And we're not asking community to come to these meetings, we're going out to places where community is already meeting and incorporating the things that we want to hear from them. Because that makes it easy. Many of our community members are in survival mode, which means that they don't have time for an extra meeting. They don't have time for something else. They don't have time to travel to a certain place. They're working. So we're trying to get them where they are and meet them where they are. The other thing that we're doing is we're taking on legal cases regarding housing, housing discrimination, housing inequality, and when it's not adequate housing, right? And we're creating legal cases to make sure, because that's sometimes the only remedy that they have when housing is not how it looks. We're also supporting our community with the request that includes housing, but also develop housing with the other things that the community needs, like near adequate health care, near good schools. We have a lot of, our work is throughout Monterey County. We're not looking at our work on like this city or this place or anything. We're looking at how to create equity throughout Monterey County and provide the work throughout Monterey County, because it matters. Many of our families are constantly traveling out for other things. So we want to make sure that all Monterey County looks good for everyone in that community, right? That if you're going to travel to work, that it's a good place to work. That if you're going to live there, that you have the proper things, school, healthcare, all the things that the community needs. We're also purposely including civic engagement in all of our programs, in all of our services, because we believe that community first needs to be able to understand how these processes work, so then they could truly engage and not check off just boxes. We don't want that anymore. We don't want the plan to say there was community engagement when there wasn't really community engagement. We want to have true, genuine community engagement by making sure that they first understand the process, to be able to know what their role is in that process and how they can truly engage in that process and give their voice and their opinion for that. And so that's what we're working on. We're also partnering with different entities to, we believe learning is a two-way thing or a multiple way thing. So we want the agencies to understand and learn from our community. Sometimes it's not necessary to come and bring all this information, but just sit there and say, hey, what is the needs? What are the needs of housing? What's going on with housing? And just listen to what community is telling you, because that's when you're truly going to understand what should happen and what policies, what development should happen, when you are open to just sitting and listening to what community is living on a daily basis. And that includes everyone, right? We want to bring equity for everyone. I know. Give me the mic and forget it. So we really want just community to be aware and be included and actually give them the proper tools to be engaged in any process.
Well, I just kind of want to keep that community engagement piece going. I mean, it's the first bullet on my list, so I appreciate you hitting that so hard, but it is important. And I will start off the community engagement piece by recognizing that each and every one of you here, those that are watching online, you all are participating in community engagement right now, and it deserves a thank you, because we can't do the work that we're doing without this kind of engagement. So we have to keep it going. It is a super critical and challenging issue, a nut to crack, right? So it's a little bit of a push and a pull. We need to push information out there. We need to help educate the community. We need to be going out into the community and reaching them where they are, while also pulling that and helping them come to have a space where they can come and share what their opinions are. So the community engagement piece is huge, huge, huge. I get really frustrated on the city council because I say we need to find ways to communicate and engage the community better. And then people will tell me, oh, well, we post our meetings online. And it's like, no, we're required to do that by law. But what are we doing as a public agency to do a better job of going out there and hearing from the communities that we hear from, particularly with the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens? We're going to hear from, and I'm just going to be frank in this conversation, Particularly from my seat in this, on the city council in Monterey, I hear a lot from homeowners, but I don't hear a lot from renters in the community. Well, 66% of Monterey residents are renters. So there's a problem when I'm not hearing from the majority of residents in that perspective. So we can do a better job there. I just kind of want to tag on to what Kevin was saying earlier around anti-growthers. So when I was canvassing, I ran for city council in 2018, and I ran on this issue of housing, which is kind of, it scares people because it's such a huge issue, and it's like, you're never going to solve this, and you're 4 years on the council. People don't want to engage in this conversation because it's so huge and complex. But I would give my spiel to folks, and at the end of the conversation, even if they disagreed with the idea of housing development, by the end of the conversation, they would say, okay, I get it, right? I get the need for us to solve this issue around housing for our workforce that can't afford to live here. So I'm in favor of it if we're solving the problem, right? And so then it goes into this whole thing around our inclusionary housing requirements, which, just to describe what that is, in the city of Monterey, our inclusionary housing requirement says any development project that has 5 or more units requires 20% of those units to be affordable. So if it's a 5-unit project, that requires at least one of those units to be affordable. What affordable means, we can have that conversation, and that's a whole thing that we won't go into now. But all this to say that 20%, you're making 20%. So if you have 100 units, right, you're only going to have 20 of those be affordable. That's not really solving the issue. So how do we, like what Ben said, how do we get to that higher threshold to make sure that we're making more of those units affordable so that we can solve the problem, which is keeping the folks that live here locally housed? I particularly think about the city of Monterey, our huge workforce. Our main industry in the city of Monterey is hospitality. Those are a lot of low-wage jobs. And then the locals, people that live here long-term that are finding themselves priced out. So they could have lived here for multi-generations. And this is one of the other things that I communicated to folks on the campaign trail. It's like, there's no way that your child is going to be able to live in this community after they graduate, unless 1, you're okay with them living with you into adulthood, or 2, you're wealthy enough to help them find a place of their own. And then sometimes they'll jump in and they'll say, or I die and they inherit my property. But it was this recognition that there's these limited circumstances that exist that allow people to live here intergenerationally. And so we really need to make sure that we're finding those pathways. And then I just kind of want to tie in this environmental piece to the conversation, because if we're not building affordable housing in particular in our communities, like Kevin was saying, these people are going to move further and further away from the city centers and then create more greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to create more units within the local community, particularly those affordable units. And those people are going to be more likely to bike and walk to work and get around and use the local city services. On the earlier slide, you saw that the city of Monterey had 3,654 units that we need to plan for the development of over the next decade period of time. Our current number is 650. So we have a 3,000 increase in the amount of units that we need to develop. And what's so interesting about this is that it's not, right now, it's kind of a squishy thing. It's more of planning for, but as time goes on and the state gets more serious about us meeting our required numbers, they're going to start finding these ways to mandate that we actually develop this. And one of the things I get a lot of pushback for from people is like, oh, the state's coming in telling us what to do. Well, if we did what we needed to do at the local level, we would do it, but we're not doing it. And so the state does need to step in and help us out so that we can figure this out. So I'll make this my last point. There's so much that I can go into here, but so in downtown, I think there's a lot of opportunity, right? In downtown Monterey, we can build up, and we definitely need to do that. But that's not going to really help us solve all of our issues. It should get to a lot of those, but I think all parts of our community need to support. And so ADUs, accessory dwelling units, granny suites, those are opportunities for the R1 zones or the single-family residential areas to really come in and support us in helping to achieve the goal for the entire community. So everybody needs to help. We can't just say, let's shove all the affordable housing in one spot, because that creates a whole other set of problems. And I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
right, I'll time myself to see if I can talk faster than Tyler. And still breathe. Let's see. All right. I'd like to offer the perspective of what things look like with regard to housing in this upcoming element from the hospitality sector perspective. And sadly, we have to acknowledge, and Kevin did, that water is the constraint on this housing element. So as much as I'm excited about the prospects of building more housing, the need to and the enthusiasm for it, how are we going to do that? And I commend the city of Monterey for identifying city properties that it would build below market rate housing on, but sadly they're constrained and can only have enough housing for one of those sites and not its full potential. So we have to acknowledge this water crisis is contributing to the housing crisis. And in turn, what we see as employers, it's manifesting itself in a workforce recruitment and retention problem, much like Amanda articulated. We see the same thing in hospitality. And what really gets me personally is that overall, this leads to a decline in just our own human well-being. What I mean by that is when workers are rent burdened, maybe some of you have heard this term or have not, it means when you pay more than 30% of your paycheck toward your housing, you are considered rent burdened. You can't afford other things. And sadly, some people, and Adriana, you know this term probably, the rent eats first. There are people who give up food and rely on food banks because they have to make the rent. So what that translates to, I've got a coworker who's a custodial supervisor, been with us about 17 years. He works 2 jobs. He sees his son only 30 minutes a day in between those shifts. Now, how can he be a parent to his child? And how can we nurture that next generation if we're always at work, just trying to keep a roof over our kids' heads, but we can never be a parent to our child? The economy of the peninsula, it's hospitality. Hospitality doesn't pay a 6-figure tech worker job like it does in other communities. But here we are. We have this amazing asset in hospitality, the Monterey Bay, where people travel from around the region, the state, the country, and the world to see what we have to offer here. This is a foundation of our economy, and how can we support our workforce when rents are rising higher than the wages can keep up with? So at the aquarium, we did a survey of our employees, annual survey in the fall, and we found that 55%, that's more than half of our workers, worry about their personal finances on a day-to-day basis. The California Housing Partnership recently reported that in order to afford to live in Monterey County, you would have to get paid $36 an hour. At the aquarium, our starting wage is $18 an hour. That's above the state's 15 minimum. However, if we were to pay our workforce enough to not be rent burdened, would require another $5.5 million per year in costs. That is just not an option for a nonprofit organization like ours, and for many organizations for that matter. And for those employees who start their careers with us, they find greener pastures elsewhere when they want to build a house, start a family. And when we hear from employees who reject our offers for jobs or just give up on the interview process, they cite the cost of living as a reason for not pursuing work with us. This isn't unique to the aquarium. It's endemic throughout our hospitality association members. So again, water is the constraint. We're gonna have to figure this one out. But when and if we develop or find adequate water to allow housing to be built in the hospitality sector, we see great value in increasing the density and doing the downtown what I call walkable housing strategy. Our workers at the aquarium who live in the Pacific Grove or New Monterey walk or bike to work. I can see more of that happening if we build more housing in downtown Monterey, downtown PG. Even those who live in Seaside Marina, biking in on the rec trail, what a great asset to that. They're motivated to do that for their own health, get a workout while you're going to work, and to avoid the time just getting sucked up in the traffic congestion. They also personally, because they work at the aquarium and live the mission of ocean conservation, benefit from doing their part to reduce carbon emissions. And I think, Kevin, you mentioned this earlier too, the fact that only 19% of the workers who work in Monterey live in Monterey. So it's that Highway 1 commute, people coming into town, causing that congestion. So I'm excited about the possibilities of these new incentives to drive density and make walkable housing. The high number of below market rate units that are slated for the Peninsula cities seems pretty daunting when I look at those numbers. However, this is what is needed to sustain a workforce that is the hospitality sector. Hospitality is a human high touch occupation. When we survey our guests at the aquarium, the highest marks we get from someone, it's because they had an interaction with one of our paid staff or interpreters or volunteers, when they get some inside scoop on what exactly the great Pacific octopus is about and their sleeping habits, or they learn about how we manage to raise jellyfish behind the scenes. That's what makes us the best aquarium in the world. It's our people, it's our workforce who love to do what they do and can engage others in understanding the incredible life that lies below that surface of the ocean that we drive by. So it's our people, and investments in housing our people are what is going to sustain our hospitality economy. And we need these below market rate units to be homes for our working families in hospitality. And lastly, I'll just throw out one idea, maybe if we have time to discuss. If we can't build housing because we have not solved this water problem, how might we retain housing? Someone mentioned it earlier. If there are, I think you did, Anastasia, if there are properties that are being sold or sold to speculators, is there a way that we can secure those properties? There are two models being discussed in San Jose and maybe other places: tenant occupancy purchase agreements or community occupancy purchase agreements, whereby the tenants could buy that property, or a nonprofit developer like a Mid-Penn could buy that property before it's sold. So maybe that's something we need to talk about as a short-term measure while we figure out the water, which we have got to solve in order to keep our workforce housed. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a great panel. I'm glad to be here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly Wolf. I'm the impact manager for affordable housing at United Way Monterey County. And United Way Monterey County kind of has three main focus areas, one of which we've identified. The community has a huge need for obviously affordable housing, as we've been talking about today. And United Way has had the opportunity over the past year to administer the county's rent and utility assistance program. So I'm here to talk a little bit about what we've seen from administering that program, along with our amazing partners, including the City of Seaside, who's represented here tonight. They've been a really wonderful partner. So, as we've heard tonight, we've heard a lot of great strategies and issues around housing. The housing crisis is really nothing new, but over the past couple of years, the pandemic has really changed the landscape of the rental market. A few of the things that we've seen through analyzing our data from our rental assistance program, we analyzed around just over 5,000 records of households from our program specifically. And what we found was, first of all, on average, our rental assistance applicants would have to spend over 90% of their income on rent. The other thing that we found was that in the last month that we were accepting applications from the program, of 700 applications we received in the month of March 2022, about 300 households had received eviction notices. So we're seeing a wave of evictions now that the eviction moratorium has been lifted, and we've seen that moratorium and the pandemic has had a huge effect and been a huge burden on smaller landlords, many of whom have had to sell. In addition to that, we've seen rent prices have increased by 8% over the past year on top of everything else. So what we're really seeing here is a huge change in the landscape of the rental market, and it's going to lead to a wave of evictions, a wave of new folks becoming homeless in our community. And there's really no time like now than to focus on advocating for new strategies and to focus on creating robust housing elements around the county, particularly on the peninsula. Many of our applicants lived on the peninsula, particularly Monterey, and we're struggling to pay their rent because of the high costs, which we've talked about here. And I mean, greater than 30% of your rent spending on that on greater than 30% of your income spending that on rent is already cost burden. So imagine, especially seniors, people who are unemployed, living on fixed income, disabled, trying to keep up with the rising costs of rent on a fixed income. It's just impossible. We need more housing. So moving forward, I mean, as we wind down our rent assistance program, the United Way is looking to kind of pursue some different strategies and identify really actionable strategies that we can pursue as a community to try to increase the supply of affordable housing in the community. And we need many strategies, not just development. We also need education, we need advocacy, and most of all, we need to connect and we need to co-create and partner and figure out what we can do as a community to solve this issue. So that's kind of what we're looking to do going forward. And thank you very much for being here tonight. You're a part of it, so thank you.
Thank you all so much, panelists and presenters. So as mentioned, we will be moving to a discussion. But first, I just want to make a quick announcement to remind folks that we are recording this meeting, so folks can review it later on our website. Y otra vez quiero hacer un anuncio que tenemos servicios de interpretación. Si hay alguien que necesita, por favor, levante su mano y podemos ayudarte con este servicio. Okay, looks like we're set there. So as mentioned, I do have some prepped questions, but I would really just like to take this time to open it up to the audience. And while we're moving into the next 30 minutes of discussion, please feel free to stand up, shake it out, take a couple breaths, and help yourself to some more snacks and drinks as well. We really appreciate your attention and all this information that we've been sharing with you all today. And so I'm going to go ahead and keep one microphone for the panelists and another microphone for the audience. So just go ahead and raise your hand and we will bring the microphone on over, and then happy to repeat questions into the microphone as well, so folks who are tuning in on Facebook Live can hear the questions. Yes.
So my name is Brian. I live in the city of Marina. I've heard a lot of the panelists touch on environmental justice issues. So in SB 1000, I think that was adopted in 2016, it tried to encourage municipalities to create a environmental justice element in addition to this housing element, and the thought that they would work together. And so my question for the panelists is, how important do you think that is? And do you think there are opportunities in this sixth cycle to get jurisdictions to actually create that environmental justice element in addition to this housing element?
Awesome. Do we have a panelist who'd like to take that on?
All right, I'll be the first. It sounds like a lot of people have something to add to this, but absolutely. Yes, it's not an option to fail to do that. I think as anybody on this panel can tell you, we can't ignore the science that tells us what's happening to the world. And if we don't include environmental justice in our housing elements, then we are doing a disservice to the people who are affected by housing elements. And in fact, environmental justice and environmental quality is part of the affirmatively for fair housing guidelines that will determine how housing elements are written. So there are guidelines for it, but that doesn't mean that our communities can just sit and wait for our cities to make it happen. We need to push for it. So keep showing up to these meetings, please, and we'll keep pulling people to you.
Can everybody hear me? Yeah.
Let's use the mic just in case we're
Hold on. I think he answered the question. Aliana, it gave a really passion. It really comes down to, you know, is a city, or are you just going to check the boxes, or are you really going to implement it, right? And I think as a staff member, I don't want to just check the boxes. Let's actually, if we say we're going to do something to support the community, let's actually do it. Right? And Well, what would be the point of having 30 community meetings if you're not actually gonna do stuff?
I would just add, if you're gonna add anything for environmental justice and environmental solutions, also think about how feasible it's gonna be for community, like for example, transportation. From certain communities, it takes like about 3 hours to get to actually Marina. So if we're gonna make sure that public transportation is an option for community to address environmental issues, we have to make sure that it's not a 3-hour commute and it's something that is more feasible for our community, because right now, I mean, it takes, go to Salinas, then Salinas come to Marina. It's like, why can't we just come straight to Marina?
Thank you. And actually, since I have the mic, I'm going to take a look for it. So Matt Wertz, I'm with the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership as well, Housing Program Director. And I just want to riff a little bit off what I just heard too. So when we're talking about environmental impacts and we're talking about housing, historically, a lot of times affordable housing and higher density housing has been pushed in the corner, has been pushed to the least desirable areas of the community. And so going forward, unfortunately, a lot of times that's still where we're looking at needing to redevelop those sites. So there needs to be just kind of cognizant, understanding that a lot of times in order to make, Fort Ort's a good example, right? In order to make it a healthy enough place again, we have to, demolish certain things. We have to make sure there's no ordinance there. We have to redevelop it and improve it in such a way, and that's not cheap. And so we have to think about the public investment of going into these spaces and making them nurturing, beautiful, healthy places again. And that's part of this element process as well.
Kevin, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I did, and it's actually a little bit of a different perspective. So like everybody can talk about environmental justice. We all want it. The truth is, Matt, one of the reasons why affordable housing is built in less desirable areas is because it's not as expensive to build them. And as you deal with environmental justice, you have to also look at, where can we build affordable housing? Where are we going to build as much of it as possible? And their finances come into play where you're dealing with environmental justice. So it sounds on the surface, yeah, everybody wants environmental justice. I think that's great. The truth is, actual implementation can be very difficult for many reasons. So we got to keep that in mind. And I'm always careful not to, jump on board with the checking of the boxes here without thinking about all of the different implications of it.
And I think you had a comment over here.
Question, unless we want to continue on this environmental justice situation. My question is, what I hear loud and clear is that the people who are working here do not really have enough finances, money to rent or to buy, and that all the rules we have been putting together, the 20%, is not enough to meet the need. So the question is, have we considered, in addition to what we are considering, the location, to build a higher density, try to build inside the city instead of outside? Have we considered other policies, like in the case of the rent go up and up, and the investor from outside come in, buy the rental unit and check it up higher and higher, and therefore people couldn't afford it. Could we possibly, like other cities, put in some policy to control the rising of the rent so that it would correspond to the rising of the wages? Could that be one of the elements to consider? I know that a lot of people do not like that. Also, that I hear some blames for not having water to build the units. I think it's a policy issue. We actually have enough water. With the new project, the injection of recycled water into the basin, we have enough to build new units. So it's a matter of whether we will look at our policy to redefine and giving the water credit for building permit.
Okay, so I heard a couple questions there. Sounds like there's a question around policies around rent stabilization. And then a second question about, is there enough is there enough water to build the units that we have planned for? So first question, from some experience, I think you guys at the city council level have been engaging in this. Can you kind of give a quick synopsis of where that stands?
Yeah, so the first part of your question was housing in the city center. And so it was brought up a little bit, but I'll kind of just describe what we're doing in the city of Monterey. So we had staff look at all publicly owned property in the city of Monterey. And then from that list, they removed anything that didn't make sense to develop housing on: sidewalks, roads, maybe some hillsides that may not be appropriate for housing developments. They ended up coming up with 5. Council gave direction to move forward with looking at 4. They're all in downtown Monterey. And out of all of those units, they can create, if we're able to develop on all those, they're 100% affordable housing projects. And they can create over 150 affordable units within the city of Monterey. So it can be done. We're looking at it. And I just kind of wanted to go off of the piece around the water, and I'm going to come back to that larger water point in a second. But it was brought up during our council meeting last week when we were looking at these, that we only have enough water in the city's reserves for 1 project to be completed out of those 4. But what was interesting was that the developers presented, and one of the developers were talking about using creative solutions to find ways of helping to meet that water need to make at least 2 of those projects work. So they're talking about water reuse, recycled water, water storage and collection on site. There was also, I suggested, why don't we look at opening it up to have residents in the city of Monterey maybe give us some of their water credits if they have credits for their property and aren't using them. And somebody actually spoke during public comments and said, I will give you my water credits, right? So I think that there's a way that we can work some of these solutions. Water is a huge issue. I would not say that the expansion project is enough for the long term in regards to our water supply needs, particularly when you look at these new RENA numbers. So there is opportunities for us to look at things. Where we're at with the water is we do have enough water technically to move forward with projects now, but we're under the cease and desist order where the State Water Resources Control Board has told CalAm, our water purveyor, that they cannot withdraw additional water from the Carmel River, or we're going to start paying fines. Well, we're not doing that right now, but because of the drought that we're going through next year, we're seeing ourselves going to have to potentially withdraw more from the Carmel River. Now, there's some solutions around that, and there's a big effort to push State Water Resources Control Board from just lifting the CDO, but we're not in a position to do that. The State Water Resources Control Board isn't going to do that. But what we can do is try to make an effort to the state and say, can you remove condition 2? And I know I'm getting very technical in this, but condition 2 is limiting us from using water that we currently have available to move water around and add water meters to sites. So we're not asking to use any additional water. We're talking about using the water that we have available to us, which is one of our problems in developing these units. And then real quick, rent stabilization. So the state in 2019 implemented AB 1482, which basically created statewide rent control. So it's already law at the state level, but the problem with that is whether you agree or disagree with rent control, and there's arguments for and against it. So if you support it, the problem with it is how it works. You can increase rent up to 5% plus CPI to a maximum of 10% a year. So if you imagine somebody's rent is $2,000 a month, 10% increase, which was what the max increase was for last year because of the high CPI. That's a lot. You're talking about a lot for somebody that's a renter and is already paying high. So the argument at this point isn't whether rent control is good or bad, because the fact is that it's state law and 10% does not make sense. So I think that there's space for us to have a conversation around what is that sweet spot? How can we make this work to where we're not costing out, mom and pop shop landlords, but we're also not allowing these spectator market folks to come in and take over our properties and not allow folks to be able to live here long term. So.
Thank you, council member. So.
Got a comment?
Sorry,
Anyone else on this? Yeah.
just wanted to make sure, does anybody else want to comment on water or anything else? So just before we take another question, so one thing about the water piece that's really important as well, because everybody likes to think that we're unique, we're the one, this is be falling upon us. The Bay Area has suffered with that for a long time. The Central Valley has suffered with that for a long time. Somehow folks are finding ways to move forward, right? And there was a study recently actually conducted by Spur and with the Pacific Institute that studied the Bay Area that has grown by over 1/3 in the last 40 years and has actually reduced its water consumption because of conservation efforts, because of the transferability, some of the things that were mentioned here. So that's a much bigger scale. There's lots of complications there, lots of different moving parts, but part of the thing to just put on the table is that where there's a will, there's a way. And so it starts with having enough willpower from the local elected officials and residents pushing forward with more housing. And hopefully, again, we're smart enough here to figure it out, a way forward. It's not without its challenges, but again, we can learn from the Bay Area and other places that have figured it out and are continuing to figure it out. So
many people are living in multiple families living in one household, so they're already here using water in that family. It's just that they're not living in a good condition to be able to do anything. It's not healthy living style, but they're already living here and they're already using the water. The 20% of the students who are homeless are probably living in a household with 2 or 3 other families who are already using the water in that household. So let's find creative solutions because people are still using the water already.
great point. So we have some more questions. You want to take a couple there and then we'll bring it back here?
Hi, kind of the elephant in the room to me is we live in the most beautiful place on the earth, and someone told me once that this is a barbell community. You either have 2 homes or 2 jobs. And beyond that, it's gotten really quite inequitable. One of the ideas that was floated by the community engagement that Tyler was vacancy tax. And I looked into that and I thought it was a great idea because I go by empty homes and it all really makes sense and worked beautifully in Vancouver, British Columbia. But one of the challenges is that it has to be just by city, and that would really work because in Monterey, I think it's mainly our whole peninsula that would really help people in Carmel and Pebble Beach that have these places that just sit there and it's empty. And so the reason why I came tonight is because I think that kind of solution would only work county-wide because what really works in Vancouver, British Columbia is they charge vacancy tax by the value of the home. And the value of the home, first it started out 1.5%, and then it was 3%. And it's worked out great. We would need to do that on a countywide basis because that's where it would be managed by the property taxes and all that. So I would just really hope we look into that because that can afford it. We have these oligarch, properties and yachts around here with, next to the homeless and the low income. And so I would really encourage us to look as a countywide community at that kind of solution. And on the water, we shouldn't be using water for anything from growing food or drinking. It should be, we have gray water, we have rainwater captures, so there are solutions out there. It's just, yeah, in those policies.
I'd like to address that.
To respond to the vacancy tax?
Yes. Yeah, I actually have a big electronic folder of all the vacancy tax proposals and staff reports from across the state. And to tell you the truth, I can't understand why somebody would own property and not try to improve it and make money off of it. But maybe, I'm biased by my own cultural leanings on this. But I just can't understand all these vacant properties all over the place in Monterey. They're all over. I walk the dog and I see them. And I have no idea who's owning these. In Carmel, the population there has gone down about 40% since 1980. And I'm betting there's a lot of vacancy there. So on a personal basis, I'd love to see some sort of public policy that nudged people with property to either improve it or sell it. But I'm sure there's going to be objections here or there. One thing that has been helpful is when I was looking at vacancy and blight control for the Salinas City Center Improvement Association in Salinas, the city council ended up voting for a blight accountability ordinance. And it actually has been surprisingly effective in forcing some of the out of area owners of blighted buildings, after they've been dinged a few times, the city takes them to court, and all of them have ended up surrendering and selling their property to others who immediately began improving them. So vacancy tax, I know they have it, I think in Oakland and in San Francisco, they either have it or they're considering it. Here, it might be good to start a little more incrementally. I think a blight accountability ordinance like they did in Salinas should be passed in every city on the peninsula. And at the very least, the places that are deteriorated and falling apart, they should, they have property rights, but when they ruin the neighborhood with their blight, they're infringing on other people's rights. I think it's worth it to pursue that.
Thank you, Kevin. Anybody else want to say something? Council member, 30 seconds.
I know, I'm a politician, I can talk, but don't shoot me for it. No, it is quick. I'm happy to hear that there's some level of support from your perspective, Kevin, on the idea of a vacancy tax. And my whole thing with having that community engagement discussion that we've had in the city of Monterey was to identify opportunities where we can specifically allocate funding for affordable housing development. So or affordable housing programs. So it's either reallocating funding that already exists in the city of Monterey, which is really tough because who are we going to tell no to? Or it's creating new funding, bringing in new revenue, and that would mean likely having a tax, whether it be a vacancy tax, whether it be a transfer property tax. I'm not necessarily married to one specific idea, but it's the idea of creating funding specifically for housing. And the last piece that I would say is the great thing about us creating a local pot of funding for affordable housing development is it makes us more competitive for state level grants. So it's really hard for us here in a rural area to compete for these state level grants when you have large cities like LA, San Diego, San Francisco. They have huge housing staffs that support them reaching these initiatives. But if we can create a local pot of funding, we can become more competitive. So that was kind of the nexus with the idea around a vacancy tax.
You're good. Thank you, sir. We'll take it from your next question.
So we've got
Melissa.
time for about one more question with discussion.
Time for one more. It'll come from this area. I think we've had these two ladies up for a while. You guys want to fight it out? Arm wrestle? Oh, a ver, en español.
Okay, sí, está bien. Disculpe, Ana, no sé si quiere ayudarnos o yo puedo ayudarte. Cualquiera.
He estado escuchando a todos ustedes. Soy una persona que vive en una zona de departamento. Me da mucha preocupación
want to say that I've been hearing everything you have been saying. I'm a person that lives in an apartment building, and you're talking about affordable housing, and that creates a lot of worry in me because
los departamentos en los que yo vivo y muchas personas están en muy malas condiciones. Entonces, a mí lo que me gustaría es que ustedes pensaran en renovar esos departamentos, que estén en condiciones para que nosotros podamos vivir ahí.
the apartments that I live in and many people live in are in very bad conditions. So what I think, and I would like, is that you would talk about renovating and making those apartments or those places livable.
No pagamos un 30% como dicen, pagamos más de nuestro salario. Vivimos al límite. Muchas personas tienen que trabajar 2 trabajos, dejar a sus niños. Y nosotros, sin embargo, lo pagamos. Hay a veces quejas y no nos hacen caso de cómo deberíamos de vivir. Tenemos derechos y, sin embargo, no nos los dan.
It is not true. We do not pay 30% of our income. We pay much more. We live to our limit. And we have to leave our children alone to go to work. We have to work 2 jobs. Sometimes we complain about how the conditions of our housing, but they just ignore us.
Ustedes dicen que van a construir viviendas accesibles. Yo estoy viendo que para acá, para Marina, para donde está la Furor, están construyendo casas. Pero estas casas van a valer más de $2 millones. ¿Para qué las están construyendo? Y ustedes están diciendo que no tenemos agua cuando se están construyendo muchas casas.
Say that you're trying to build affordable housing. I see a lot of houses that are being built in Marina and Huron, but there are houses that are about $2 billion. They're very expensive. Who are you building those houses for? And if water is an issue, why are you still building houses?
Ahora bien, esas casas, ¿para quién van a ser? Le pregunto yo, ¿para quién van a ser? Para gente que viene y la gente trabajadora, ¿a dónde nos van a dejar? ¿A dónde? ¿Dónde van a vivir? ¿Dónde vamos a vivir? Y toda esa gente trabajadora son personas que les hacen falta a los hoteles, a las casas ricas, a los restaurantes.
Now, who are you building those houses for? Who is going to live there? It's not for the workers. We can't afford them. So where are the workers going to live? Where are you going to build houses for us? So we the workers, you need us to live here so we can work at your hotels, in houses of rich people and restaurants.
Ahora bien, construyen cosas con muy bajo presupuesto. Construyen, tenemos ahí aquí en Cisay nada más tenemos una calle, bueno, una calle muy bonita. La calle principal la renovaron, pero siento yo que no fueron con buenos materiales. Entonces, y luego ponen para las vías de la ciclismo, están mal construidos, no podemos andar en bicicleta.
I also feel that when you build with a low budget. Here in Seaside, we only have one street that is a good street, that's Main Street. And you say that we should bike to work, but to be honest, the bike lanes are not even in good condition. It's hard to bike on them.
Yo vivo en una calle, el Amador. Tiene baches. ¿Cuáles baches? Ahí son hoyos completamente, en donde no los han podido, o sea, no han podido componer esa calle. ¿Qué pasó con los impuestos?
I live in Amador Street, and they're not even, I can't even call them potholes. These are big holes. They haven't been repaired. I don't know why. Where's the tax money?
Vivimos en una zona yo fui a visitar Santa Bárbara. Wow, muy bonito. Pero aquí en Monterrey y tenemos una zona, desgraciadamente sí está limpia, pero las calles dan mucho que desear y también las estructuras están con mala pintura, está muy mal.
Disculpe, señora, si este momento estamos tratando de hacer unas preguntas. ¿Okay? So, muchísimas gracias por tus comentarios y vamos a mover adelante. Ok, gracias.
Yo sé que son preguntas, pero todo lo que les estoy diciendo son muchas, abarca muchas preguntas. Yo les agradecería que fueran conscientes, que pensaran realmente en la comunidad. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias.
I know we're, right now, it's time for QA. And I know that what I'm saying in it has a lot of questions. So I just ask you to please be aware of the community needs.
We have a couple folks respond to her, at least, so we're gonna do 3 responses, Adriana, and then trustee, and Anastasia has a thought. Is that okay? Okay.
Muchas gracias por sus comentarios. Thank you so much for your comments. And this is what I mean when I say we cannot check out boxes. Because there's current situations that are happening and past plans that included community engagement. It wasn't true community engagement. It wasn't true hearing our communities, and it created years and years of problems that now we're currently seeing and they're talking about. And how do we make sure that at the same time that we develop new housing, we take care of the housing that exists and make sure that there's ordinance and there's policies and there's things that are happening to make sure those housing conditions are habitable for people. And hear the voices of the history, hear the voices of what has happened, to learn the lessons and to learn things from those, and make sure that we don't repeat the same things that are happening to our community members, and make sure that they are centered in any decision that is happening and centered in processes, as well as making sure that it's actually truly accessible to our community. I just want to emphasize that exactly what she said. Make sure you talk to community, engage community and everything.
I just wanted to highlight that there are 300 affordable housing units within the project that she mentioned. I just want to make sure that gets translated. And then we are creating that eligibility list in the next year to have people housed in those units. But I also want to thank you for speaking up. I know it takes a lot of courage to speak up in these meetings, and we're all here to help you and other people listening so that we can rehabilitate those houses that you're living in. That is part of the housing element. There is a specific goal within the housing element to preserve and protect existing housing. So it's a really good point you're bringing up. And that is something that all the cities and all the people here are focused on for the next housing element. So.
Thank you for those comments. I really appreciate it. I just wanted to offer, since you brought up housing, the new housing that's being built in Marina and East Garrison, really interesting observation that we've seen in the school district is that for all that housing that's being built out there, large single-family homes, some townhomes and multifamily units, we are seeing very few students coming from that development into our school district. So it really makes you wonder, who is buying these houses, right? Who are these houses for? And so, exactly, it's Bay Area. So as the affordable units come online, I'll be very curious. Do we see families moving into those affordable units? Do we get more students in our Marina schools from those housing units? Because East Garrison and the Dunes and whatever the other one is, we're not seeing it.
Thank you. Station.
Ok, gracias para sus preguntas. Lo siento, pero mi español no es perfecto, pero es muy importante que hablamos juntos y tratamos entender todo, ¿cierto? Y quiero decir que tenemos dos programas de rehabilitación en Monterey County, es en Pacific Grove y en Salinas también. Y ese programa es muy importante a proteger todos los casas que tenemos, pero necesitamos más y hablamos un poquito de proteger los edificios con muchas personas que se rentan su casa. Entonces necesitamos continuar a trabajar con eso. So, gracias por sus comentarios y vamos a continuar a tratar eso. Gracias.
Awesome, thank you. Those are all such great points and questions and comments, and this is hopefully only the start of this very important discussion that we're all having. It takes all of us, right? It takes a village to move the needle forward. So it's just great to see you all here participating, and ultimately that we keep doing this time and again. Tune into your local city government, show up, make comment, write letters of support, go to your planning commission meetings. And most importantly, check out MF's website as well as your city's website, because we will continue to have more resources available, including these workshops on our website. And I'm just gonna move this information over so you can check that out if you're interested. With the last few minutes that we have here, and I know there are a lot more questions and comments, but I do just want to plug again, we have a sign-in with a raffle. So if you didn't get a chance, please raise your hand and Angela will meet you to make sure that you get your raffle ticket for a chance to win. And also a game Xbox headset. And in addition, in the last few minutes here, please check out our resources. We have, again, a gathering for women in the back with a bunch of awesome information about the organization. We've got Pacific Grove, City of Pacific Grove booth with information on their housing element and fair housing. We've got Alliance on Aging over here. Thank you. And we've also got Independent Transportation Network. Again, thank you, Jessica, for the snacks and water. And we have more snacks. So in addition to wrapping up and making sure everyone has a raffle, we do have a survey. If you all have a chance, we would really love if you could just whip out your devices, if you have them on you, open up the camera to the screen. The QR code there will take you to a link to participate in a quick bilingual survey. And tell us a little bit more about those comments and questions that we all still have. And if you'll take a moment to aggregate that information and get back to everyone who's interested in hearing more from us. Thank you.
Gal who spoke in Spanish, speak what she said in English.
Sure, good point. So, yeah, good point. So we have a question over here just for Anastasia to please repeat what she said briefly in English for folks who did not have their interpretation devices with them.
Thank you, sorry. So I was saying that we have two programs for rehabilitation in Monterey County. And one is in the city of Pacific Grove and one is in Salinas. And these are long-term running programs to help low-income people rehabilitate their homes. And that we need to continue to work on rehabilitating multifamily residential units where people rent. So those are both like critical components of preserving affordable housing, because a lot of people who actually do own their homes may not be able to afford anything else. And if something happens, and a lot of people want to age in place as well, that we're seeing in Pacific Grove, and it's really important that we help people continue to live in the community and not have to leave, and make sure they can age in place. And that may mean a renovation for their unit to make it more accessible so that they can continue to live there for the rest of their life. So those are really key critical things, and to make sure that renovations happen. And honestly, one of the ways that I'm thinking about getting affordable units in the city of Pacific Grove is maybe conversion of existing units into affordable. That is something that counts towards the RHNA.
So we've got to get creative and think of ways, how can we convert units that are now above moderate into affordable and make that part of our arena. Thank you.
And I just want to add on, so the city of Monterey has a program too. We have called Mr. Fix It. So we do have home rehabilitation. We do have home rehabilitation for the city of Monterey as well. So that's something that's also available for residents. And then we do purchase homes and we put them back on the market for affordable home buying. So it's another piece of the element, is trying to get people into being homeowners and having that affordable option to them. So I just encourage folks, if they're looking for options, the city of Monterey has a really good website for housing programs.
Awesome. Well, with that, we have a couple more minutes, so please stand up again, shake it out. Thank you all. Give yourselves a round of applause for coming out tonight. Help any and every snack you can find. Check out some resources. We've got much in the back. I look forward to doing it again soon. Thank you.